nuclear submarine with a liquid hot water system. Project 627. I used to be in command of one such submarine in the Northern Fleet.
In the West, these subs are codenamed the November class. Like the Nautilus, the Novembers are attack submarines, meaning they are designed to attack surface ships and other submarines. The initial vessel of the November class is launched in August 1957, 3 years after the Nautilus. Because of its nuclear power plant, the November is able to stay submerged virtually indefinitely, just like the Nautilus. And on July 17, 1962, almost 4 years after the Nautilus's historic voyage, a November also journeys to the North Pole. But there are several design differences between the Soviet and U.S. nuclear subs.
Its main job would be to catch aircraft carriers before they could launch aircraft to drop nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union. So to do that, it had to be very fast.
Whereas the Nautilus is driven by a single nuclear reactor, the November class and most future Soviet nuclear subs have two. This helps give the Soviet sub a top underwater speed of 30 knots compared to the Nautilus's 23.5.
On the other hand, to make it fast, they had to live with a lot of noise. The reason noise matters is that a lot of submarines are detected by the noise they make. It made a lot of noise.
Although the November class has its problems, its speed and performance still impressed the U.S. Navy, helping to pave the way for the development of newer and faster U.S. submarine types.
And we can see throughout the Cold War there's competitive leapfrogging going on between the world's two military superpowers.
In the meantime, both the U.S. and Soviet navies are developing an entirely new role for the submarine, one that will make it the most powerful warship in the history of the world. On December 30th, 1959, the nuclear-powered USS George Washington is commissioned. By now, the US and Russia each possess several nuclear submarines, but the George Washington is different from any nuclear sub ever built. Within her hull, in an area her sailors dub Sherwood Forest because it looks like a grove of massive tree trunks, she carries 16 Polaris missiles. Each of these 28-foot-tall, 28,000-pound weapons carries a nuclear warhead and has a range of 1,200 miles. Unlike the cruise missiles pioneered by the Soviet Navy, they are ballistic missiles.
Cruise missiles can lock onto the target, can follow the target, and they'll hit it. A ballistic missile is very different. Fire it up, usually it gets out of the atmosphere, and then it comes down. And the coming down is all governed by the law of gravity, so it really can't be maneuvered very much on the way down. You have to fire it at something you aimed at when you fire the missile.
The George Washington and those like her that follow are part of a whole new type of submarine. They're nicknamed boomers.
This is because they fire missiles which go boom. It's as simple as that. But it's caught on in the sort of vocabulary of the Cold War.
Each George Washington carries enough nuclear force to obliterate over a dozen large cities. The U.S. has significantly upped the stakes in the Cold War naval arms race. Now, for the first time, the Russian homeland is vulnerable to nuclear annihilation from the sea. For Admiral Gorshkov and the Red Navy, it is an immense challenge, one that has to be met. The end result will be one of the largest and most devastatingly powerful submarines ever built. Rising out of the water like a small island, the Russian Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarine is by far the largest sub ever made. Weighing an estimated 34,000 tons submerged, it is nearly twice the displacement of the biggest U.S. sub, the Ohio class, which is 19,000 tons submerged.
У нас лодки были не хуже. In terms of building large submarines, submarines of gigantic water displacement, here we left America far behind by creating the Typhoon. It is a very large submarine, which was intended to use its weaponry from the Arctic regions, break through very thick layers of ice with its own body.
Armed with 20 nuclear ballistic missiles, each with a range of over 6,000 miles, the Typhoon carries more destructive power than all the bombs dropped in all of World War II. Even those who serve aboard this giant are impressed by its size and capabilities.
Первый раз я увидел в школе.
I saw it for the first time in school. Compared to others, it is a gigantic ship.
Так же, как бы
It also provides us with peace. And in case of war, we are ready to show our strength. Everybody knows his task and is always ready to perform it. It is, you can say, like a chained dog that gets fed in order to protect. And thus, there are no thieves. But in case of danger, the dog will bite.
The first Typhoon is launched in 1980, near the end of Admiral Gorshkov's tenure as commander of the Soviet Navy. It is the culmination of his building program for strategic nuclear missile submarines, or boomers, which began in 1954.
The typical ballistic submarine during the Cold War on the American side was the George Washington class. And this had to be countered by the Soviets, and they matched this with a class called the Yankee class, very appropriately. But even within the Soviet Navy, these were known as Ivan Washington class, or indeed Little Georges.
The initial Yankee class sub goes to sea in 1967. Each carries 16 R-27 nuclear missiles with a range of around 1,500 miles. Eventually, 34 Yankees are launched, but both Gorshkov and the Western Allies continue to deploy even larger and more capable classes of boomers.
Towards the end of the Cold War, the transition from Polaris missiles to Trident was reflected in the fact that the Americans had the more sophisticated Ohio class and the British the new Vanguard class. Conversely, on the Soviet side, we saw the emergence of the new Delta class and its very advanced variant, the Delta IV. And this led in turn to be complemented by the huge Typhoon class.
In 1972, a revolutionary Soviet nuclear-powered attack submarine takes to the seas, one that throws the leaders of the U.S. Navy into near panic. Why? Because it is so fast and can dive so deep that it can not only elude all existing U.S. subs, but even most of their torpedoes. This incredible vessel is the Alpha class.
Alpha was conceived as a very fast sub. The way they got their high speed was they took the most powerful reactor they could get, which was a fairly exotic liquid metal reactor. They wrapped the smallest, lightest hull around it, and they made the hull out of titanium so it would take up the least weight.
Lighter and stronger than steel, titanium is expensive and difficult to weld. But its use cuts the weight of the Alpha's hull by nearly 30%, while greatly increasing its strength, helping to give the sub an incredible top speed of nearly 45 knots. Following the launch of the November class in 1957, the Soviets rapidly developed several more types of nuclear attack submarines. Each one is faster and deadlier than the last, but they all have drawbacks as well. The main one being they are considerably noisier than their Western counterparts. This is a particular problem with the Alpha.
Underwater, noise can be heard for hundreds of miles in some cases by somebody listening on a microphone or hydrophone of some sort. My colleagues told me that it was so noisy that when it came off the top of the North Cape, the top of Norway, doing 40 knots, it was heard all the way down in Bermuda. It also had a very unstable reactor. But the positive spin-off was that the Americans in particular saw the need to have a new class of hunter-killer submarine that could counter this sort of technological package. And that was the Los Angeles class, which set the standard very much in the 80s for the sort of submarine that was required in the modern world.
Then in 1985, the Soviets significantly evened the odds when they introduced the remarkable Akula class.
When Akula was conceived, the Russians suddenly realized that we really could detect their submarines by their sounds, and therefore they made tremendous efforts to silence submarines. So they designed the Akula.
It had to be countered, if only because the Americans wanted to stay on the forefront of technology. And we see new Western submarine designs now, the Seawolf and the Virginia class, which will be followed very rapidly soon by the Astute class in the United Kingdom, taking forward the boundaries of submarine design and noise quietening.
Even even though Western navies managed to stay ahead in the race for quiet submarines, there is one whole type of Soviet sub that the US has no parallel to. A model specifically designed to fire cruise missiles.
America did not and does not have, due to the lack of need, submarines with cruise missiles intended for attacking large surface ships. The reason was in that we did not have such large surface ships as did the United States. Aircraft carriers, which had to be destroyed in case of war with those kind of cruise missiles.
Like the cruise missiles they carried, there is a large variety of Soviet cruise missile submarines, both diesel-electric and nuclear powered. But the early models all have one major problem. They can't fire their missiles while submerged. As a result, the Soviets continue developing newer, larger, and more capable cruise missile subs and weapons. In 1986, their efforts culminate in the awesome Oscar II.
One of the most potent Russian submarines is the Oscar II class, which is a major floating battery for SSN-19 shipwreck missiles. It deploys 24 of these, and it's capable of launching them from deep, undetected, with information received from satellite and other ships, submarines, and aircraft.
Weighing an enormous 24,000 tons and able to make submerged speeds in excess of 30 knots, the Oscar II class is one of the Russian Navy's most spectacular technical accomplishments, but it is also the focus of one of its worst tragedies. August 12, 2000. The Oscar II class submarine Kursk is on maneuvers in the Barents Sea.
Kursk was training with surface ships off of Murmansk to work up for a cruise to the Mediterranean. As part of these training exercises, the ships were firing weapons in simulated exercises.
9 years before, in December 1991, the once mighty Soviet Union dissolved under the crushing burdens of a crumbling economy and intense political unrest. The Cold War ended, and the Soviet Navy once more became the Russian Navy. The confusion and shrinking budgets under a newly evolving government had a severe impact on this force.
После того, как распался Советский Союз и осталась Россия,
Russia's economic capabilities prevented it from having a powerful fleet with such a great number of ships as it had earlier. The technology and weaponry got outdated, and the conclusion of the State Committee was that the tragedy was caused by a torpedo explosion inside the submarine.
The initial explosion detonates other torpedoes, and a highly pressurized wave of air and fire sweeps through the forward compartments of the Kursk. Most of the 118-man crew is killed as the Kursk sinks to the bottom in nearly 350 feet of water. But in the rear of the vessel, 23 survivors cling to life and hope. They know that a rescue operation at that depth is possible, and they believe it is coming. Though Russian naval authorities at the time realized that Western underwater rescue vehicles and equipment are superior to their own, they believe their rescue gear can handle the job.
But because of the weather and the technological limitations on the equipment that they had, meant that they left it far too late to call for help. I think there was also a measure of national pride in it as well, that they didn't want to contact their former enemies amongst NATO, United States and the UK. And I suspect also there was a measure of wanting to keep the secrets associated with a platform like the Oscar secret. All these things, I think, conspired to make them delay.
Meanwhile, the few survivors aboard the Kursk wait and wait. In a hastily composed note, one of the men, 27-year-old Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Koleshnikov, writes of their ordeal. Though his exact words are not made public, some of his comments are reported.
All personnel from Section 6, 7, and 8 have moved to Section 9. There are 23 people here. We made this decision as a result of the accident. us can get to the surface. I am writing blindly.
They struggled on after Kursk sank, at first in light and then in utter darkness as the pressure built. And they finally died.
A monument to the 118 sailors who lose their lives aboard the Kursk is dedicated in the city of Zapernaya Lica on the Barents Sea, where the submarine was based. But the principal Kursk memorial is in Serafomovsky Cemetery in St. Petersburg, the traditional home of Peter the Great's navy. Here, the Kursk's captain and 31 of his crewmen are buried. Ultimately, 94 bodies are recovered from the wreckage. The remainder are interred at cemeteries across Russia.
Конечно, для военно-морского
The
флота
loss of the Kursk was an immense tragedy for the Russian Navy. And not only for the Russian Navy, but for the whole nation and its people. And as a submariner, I completely understand the conditions of those who were on that submarine and their families. Was it possible to avoid this problem? You know, in any case, catastrophes exist, will exist, and continue to exist today. Some of the catastrophes are caused by people, and some of them occur independently. I think that the tragedy of the Kursk was neither a fault of its crew, nor of the Northern Fleet.